This is going to be a super shootout. 65 Super Reverb reissue versus the brand new Fender Tone Master Super Reverb. We're going to put these amplifiers back to back, talk a little bit about the similarities, the differences, which one might be best for you. Stay tuned to the end because I am going to crank them both. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Follow the links below where you can listen to some music, and I hope you enjoy. So I've gotten a lot of requests for this video since the Tone Master Super came out, and those of you that saw me do a review of that amplifier, and also know that this amplifier sitting right next to me, the 65 Reissue Super Reverb, is one of my favorite and most special all-time amplifiers. I absolutely love the Super Reverb, and if I could only keep one amplifier in whatever cruel world that would be, if it weren't this one that I would keep, I would be absolutely heartbroken about losing it. So I'm a big super fan. I love their tone. I love their nuances. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about what you're hearing. Now, the first thing that you may have noticed is that the reverb levels were different. In fact, I'll bet some of you are saying, this isn't entirely a fair comparison because you've got the reverb turned up louder on the 65 Reissue than you do on the Tone Master. How can you shoot the two out that way? Well, ironically, you're correct in one way and incorrect in another way. The reverb was actually turned up higher on the Tone Master and lower on the 65 Reissue, which highlights one of the first differences. There are some differences in the way that they generally interact and the way that settings go. Now, oddly enough, EQ-wise, I found that they were pretty similar. You found the right tones for each amp at about the same place. Now, the way that I like them would be, this is give or take, a couple of notches on the knob depending on what guitar I'm using or what setting I'm in. But I like it with the treble at 6, the mids at 9, and the bass at a little bit over 3. That's about where I like it. Bright switch off. You do not need the bright switch on either of these amplifiers. I am plugging into the high gain input of the vibrato channel on each for this video. So that's the EQ setting that I like, that I think works really well for each. The reverb is way more present earlier on the 65 Reissue Super. So you'll notice that on the knobs, I actually had the reverb set lower on the 65 in that first clip. I had it set all the way up to 5 on the Tone Master, and it still wasn't quite up to the level where the 65 was, lower than that. So there's a first difference, and some kind of little idiosyncrasies like that. They do respond differently. As far as tone goes, I definitely think they're in the same ballpark. There is a noticeable difference with the 65, with it having more of that 3D quality. However, the Tone Master doesn't feel flat. So this is one of those situations of don't let the good be the enemy of the great, or vice versa. The 65 Reissue kind of sounds like you're practically diving into a portal to another dimension. It's just an amp you can get lost in. You feel like you can just go right into the tone and just live there. The Tone Master gives you the picture of a super reverb. It is a reproduction of a super reverb tone. Here's where it gets interesting, is they are still really similar. Now, you're listening to these in the context of a comparison video where you're hearing the amplifiers back to back. In a real world setting, would you notice the difference? And one of the things that I want to challenge you all to think of when you listen to this video is not only how do these amps sound compared to each other, but for the Tone Master itself, is it a good tone or not? And on its own, how does it sound? I will tell you, I'm a big fan of the Tone Master, and that's actually the amp that I've been using the most lately due to its features and functionality. Some of the features that it has beyond the Tube 65 reissue is that, well, first of all, you've got an XLR direct out with 2 optional IR simulations for recording or for plugging into a PA, which I've already used in recording, and it sounds great. You've got your wattage selector switch. Now, it's not actually the wattages listed. I talk about this in my full review. This amp runs on a 200 watt power because it's solid state. But the wattage selector is kind of like what you would expect from a tube amp. So full on, it's 45 watts all the way down to a half a watt. That gives you incredible capability to dial in to the sweet spot without blowing the walls off. Now, we are going to turn them up a little bit later on. I'll talk about that in a minute. The weight is a massive issue, because the Super sitting next to me is a big, heavy amplifier. The Tone Master is almost half the weight. And lastly, the other thing is you don't need to worry about maintenance. Of course, you don't have to worry about tubes blowing or rattling, while you're on the road or taking it out to a gig and whatnot. So it's much easier to set and forget. That's why I've been using the Tone Master more. And I will be honest, when I get into a band context, I really don't notice the difference that much. I don't go, man, it's just not the 65 reissue. Now, I love the 65 reissue. I'm not putting that down. And I do think out of the two, the 65 reissue is the more genuine. However, from a purely functionality standpoint, the Tone Master really delivers. By the way, this is not a sponsored demo by Fender. I want to mention that now. My first demo of the Tone Master was sponsored. This is not sponsored. This is one I'm just doing because all of you were interested and requested it. Now, for the purposes of this video, I am keeping the Tone Master for the most part on the 45 watt setting to give you a direct comparison. We're going to try them out with an overdrive pedal in a minute, and then we're going to test out the effects much heavier on so you can really hear the differences there. And then we're going to start turning them up. I am going to crank them and turn them up to a heavier overdriven point where the volume's on at 8 on each, and then fully cranked. We're going to do all of that coming up here. I am also at the end going to show you the Tone Master fully cranked on the 45 watt mode, but then the same tone fully cranked back on the half watt mode so that you can hear the difference in how the attenuation there affects the tone, if it does at all. You can let us know what you think in the comments. So let's jump back in with some tone here. Today I'm playing a Fender Vintera 50s Telecaster unmodded, and then at the end I'm also going to add in a Gibson Firebird 5, also unmodded, for some heavier drive tones. Next, we're going to check it out with an overdrive pedal. I'm going to keep the setting the same as it was in that intro clip, which is clean volumes at about 4 and the EQ that I mentioned. The pedal that I'm using today is the Wampler Belle, which is just a fantastic overdrive. So next, we're going to check it out and see how it sounds with some overdrive. we start pushing these amplifiers more, let's check out the effects. So for this, I'm going to turn the reverb all the way up and then turn the tremolo almost all the way up. The tremolo is going to be at 8 on both speed and intensity. So check out how each of these sound with the effects. All right, now we're going to start cranking it up a little bit. First, we're going to put the volume all the way up to 8. Going to do this with both the Telecaster and the Gibson Firebird. So let's check out how they each sound at 8. I do want to mention, now I've balanced the volume for the video. The 65 reissue is louder. Even with the Tone Master at full bore on its 45 watt setting, the 65 reissue is still louder and a little bit deeper. The Tone Master, the tone sits on the surface a little bit more, and it's a little bit quieter. One's not necessarily better than the other. It's just something to be aware of. So check out how they sound with the volume up at 8. Full volume, right in the room with it. I'm doing it for all of you. Yeah. Oh yeah, you hit that like button, that subscribe button. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. So there they are. There are your super reverbs. Now, I have refrained from calling the 65 reissue the real super reverb, and the reason that I say that is because the Tone Master is a Fender super reverb put out by Fender. You could argue it's a real super reverb. It's something that they're putting out. They're putting the super reverb name on. Whether or not it's real, now you're talking about getting into the metaphysics of guitar gear and what makes a model versus a variant. I hope I don't get pruned by the TVA. Anyway, let's move on. Which one is the right one for you is probably the big question that many of you are asking. So I've already talked about the differences. If I could keep one, this is hard for me. I have much more nostalgic value with my 65 reissue. It's one of my favorite amps. I got it several days after one of my daughters was born. It's the first amp that I ever used on a TV spot. I just have a long history with this amplifier. I absolutely love it. I've recorded loads of tracks on it, which you can listen to right here. Please do listen, download, support the channel, and enjoy some really, really really good music. It's really good. The Tone Master I've just got. I've already recorded a song with the Tone Master using the direct out because the functionality of that is superb and it sounds great, and it's not a sacrifice of tone. It sounds great when you record with it direct in like that. For a practical gigging application and home studio use, I think the Tone Master is probably the one to go with because it's more functional, it's easier to carry around, and it's less expensive. If you don't mind the weight, if you're looking for an heirloom amp and you just need that pure tube tone and you don't need to worry about attenuation or any of those sorts of things or direct recording, if none of that's on your radar, then the 65 reissue is hard to beat. Is there a difference? Yes. Is the difference palpable? Maybe in a back-to-back comparison, not as much in a real-life context. Again, I'm using the Tone Master. I actually have several big shows coming up, and I've got the Tone Master. I'm planning on using the Tone Master for each of them for all the reasons that I said. And I don't feel like I'm sacrificing tone, which is another thing to keep in mind. You know, you can go off on all these tangents about how the 65, maybe it has a little bit more depth, maybe it responds this way, maybe it's got this, and it's got this feel, and da-da-da-da. None of those things are necessarily objectively better. The Tone Master is slightly more even keeled, almost to the point where it gives you a hint more of the woodiness of the guitar when you're playing it. Whereas, again, this one kind of sounds like you can just dive into the tone. Well, if you're not really looking for that deep sort of tone, then maybe the Tone Master is one you just like the tone of better anyway. I will say that neither of these amps I'm crazy about turned all the way up. They are a little grainy and fizzy, but I don't think that's the tone of a super reverb that people go for. A super reverb, in my opinion, the classic holy grail tone of the super reverb is done two ways. It's done either with a just beautiful, stunning, clean tone like you've never heard before, or it's getting to that edge of breakup tone, a very, very bluesy thing where when you dig in, it gives you some overdrive, but when you play lightly, it gives you just some nice, still clean tones. You get that, depending on the guitar you're using, probably with a volume between 6 and 8. I like that tone way better than with it cranked up. With it cranked up just doesn't do it for me. It's not a bassman. That's the thing. It's a super reverb. It's glassier. It's edgier. It can be grainier and even fizzier. So that's something to keep in mind. The Tone Master has a really convincing edge of breakup sound, especially if you use the power attenuation. You can get it at a more reasonable volume, which makes it super gigging friendly for that application. And if you want to hear that tone in more detail, check out my full review of the Fender Tone Master. So that's what I think. Please let us know in the comments, what do you think? Follow those links where you can listen to some music. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.